So, fear is often the loudest emotion we feel when our kids are involved in substance use. But what if we led with care instead? Thank you for joining us for an important conversation that will speak to how connection and relationship can make a difference in substance use and addiction. How can we show care not just for our kids, but for the broader community impacted by substance use disorder? My name is Victoria Kedis, and I'm humbled to have this important, caring conversation. As you listen, we acknowledge you may not agree with everything you hear. We invite you to listen with curiosity and take away what feels right for you. Relationships and connections play a vital role in our kids' lives. You are here, which means we have something in common. We care deeply about our young people and their well-being. And so does our guest, and I'll let him introduce himself and share why. Welcome, Guy.
Thanks, Victoria, and hi everyone. My name's Guy Felicella, and I'm a former drug user who had to be brought back to life 6 times and battled addiction and homelessness in the downtown Eastside for decades. Was also involved with gangs in my youth, and so I understand the many different complex challenges that we deal with in our world today, and sadly, far too often in our province or across North America, people are succumbing to, addiction, the toxic drug supply, and struggling with their mental health. And so I hope in sharing here, it inspires you to understand that behind each individual, there's a story. And oftentimes we don't understand the story behind the person. So before we judge somebody for their circumstances, it's really important to understand how they got there.
Thank you so much, Guy. And yes, we have a lot of feelings around this. And as I introduced the video, I spoke of fear often being the loudest emotion we experience when our kids are using substances. There's a lot of stigma attached, as you've mentioned, to substance use, but not just for the users, but for the families as well. What do you want parents and other caring adults in kids' lives to know that can help shift their thinking from substance use to reduce that stigma and maybe even remove the shame associated with it?
Yeah, I think it goes back to how we've learned about social issues in our society, or where we learn these things from, or what we heard, and maybe components of it were true and some was misleading. And one of the things that I often look back on is a lot of people think drug users are bad people because they're, buying drugs illegally off the street. But I've always said that people who use drugs aren't bad people. They just have really challenging circumstances. And, I think as parents, it's vital that we have these honest and open conversations with our children, and be also careful on how we talk about other people who are struggling, because that can have a real impact on your own child's life if you're negatively speaking about people who are struggling. Because if your own child ever does struggle, they're not going to reach out for you for support. They're going to feel that there's a lot of shame with that. And I think, one of the biggest things for kids is that at the same time, they don't want to disappoint their parents, even though they may be doing something that's not agreeable on. And so we have to be just really mindful of understanding all that, because there's a lot of things that come into play.
In one of our talks, you said if our kids don't get to feel their feelings in a safe way, they will get quiet and deal with them in an unsafe way. Can you tell me more about that and how caring adults can talk to their kids in ways that keep them talking?
Yeah, I think you have to really, you don't, depending on how old your kids are or when you want to start the conversation. I know parents, they don't want to start the conversation because they feel that it might trigger something in their children to go and try substances. That's just incorrect. I think that shows the care and concern that parents have for their children to make sure that they're informed and aware of the issues in our world today. Obviously, The leading cause of death in British Columbia between the ages of 10 to 59 is the unregulated drug supply that's out in the streets. And I think it's simple to actually start the conversation and also let them know that if they are struggling, or if, you want to have those conversations, so the door is always open. And if there's any time that maybe it's not your child, but one of your child's friends that may be experimenting with substances, I think those are the conversations where you want them to come in and be able to talk to you about it. If we don't have those conversations, they'll learn other ways. And I think kids are very fearful as well, because there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of social acceptance in their own groups. So, you just have to really be mindful that you were a kid once. And that's one of the things you have to kind of go back to remember. When I was a kid and I was experimenting substances, I was told by the DARE program that if you use drugs, you're a bad person. But we were already using drugs. And so it really just kind of stopped us in our tracks. It's like, oh, well, I'm not going to go to him and tell him I'm using drugs because I don't want them to look at me like this. So I think it's just one of those things that you really have to be mindful of when you're talking to your kids. And I think we can get to a place where we can have honest and open conversations. It doesn't have to be too complex. BC's in a public health emergency. Start there. And really just talk about, if you see somebody on the street, if you're driving by, there can be teaching moments as well. If you see somebody struggling in front of a coffee shop or a restaurant that you're going to, you could just, you can often show a little compassion sometimes as well, and say something that they're not bad people. It's just unfortunate that some people don't have the what we have in our lives, but they're still people and we should still care for them.
Mm-hmm. Where does trauma fit into that conversation about when our kids get quiet and feelings? Anything you want to add?
I think trauma is a major factor in all of this, and it doesn't have to come from the home. It can come from other areas. Kids can be bullied in school. Kids could, feel challenged with being accepted. Low self-worth, low self-esteem, anxiety, depression. Just are trying to find a way to regulate our emotions can be a traumatic experience for people. And I think with trauma is really interesting. What I've discovered with it is that if you don't deal with it, it'll deal with you. And either way, you're going to deal with it. And often when it dealt with me, it was negatively, through the reasons of why, I use substances. And I think one of the things that I look back on is there's a big difference between being happy and distracting yourself from sadness. And if you're distracting yourself from sadness, there's issues there. And oftentimes, people have a real challenging time coping or expressing how they feel, or feeling that they're not able to communicate because of low self-worth or low self-esteem. And so substances can often provide a mask for that, or they do feel more confident to talk. And so those impacts of trauma that's where it all comes in. Those open and honest conversations can really kind of take a lot of the bite out of trauma.
I'm thinking about the people that are watching this video, and they have all kinds of experience. Some of them are here because they want to have prevention in their minds of how they can maybe intervene with issues around their kids. Some of them have kids that are experimenting. It's not the same when you were younger and I was younger and experimentation was a thing, because now it can lead to something so much scarier. And so I think of those families that are now looking at that scary part. There's something bigger and worse to be afraid of right now, and that is maybe the death of our child. And maybe it's that they are causing a lot of chaos in our homes and other kids aren't safe. So thinking of that, what can we do as parents to support our young ones while still navigating the chaos that can come with substance use in our homes?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think you have to look at too also if your child is experimenting with substances, is find out what substances they're experimenting with, right?
Mhm.
And the ones that they're buying off the street, if they're in powder form or pill form, are deadly. You just don't know. They don't know. Nobody knows. But I think what do kids gravitate to first is probably more along the lines of cannabis or alcohol to experiment. Now, there's a difference between just experimenting casually every once in a while to try something, and then there's a difference between having a full-on addiction to these substances. Sure, alcohol is one of the most addictive drugs on the planet, but you also have to look at the level of experimental use. And we don't agree with it. I'm a parent myself. I'd be petrified of it, but at the same time, is that how do you work with an individual, your child, knowing that they're experimenting a little bit? If you react in a way that pushes them away, then you'll sever that relationship somewhat, where it won't be as honest as you want it to be moving forward. And I think, as tough as it is to be a parent in these situations, we have to find a way to, have the ability to understand and talk to your child without overreacting, because an overreaction can drive them into isolation, or where they just say, everything's good, mom, I stopped, or I don't do it anymore. And then you may think they are, but you'll never know. And I think, as a parent for myself, is that I'd rather know. And if it did progress to other substances, at least then we could look at ways to support them to get them the help that they need.
Thank you. The fact that we're having this conversation is one that gives me so much hope, because I listened to your introduction and a little bit of your experience of dying many times and being brought back, living on the downtown east side, being involved in gangs, and families hearing that those are all their fears out loud, of what could possibly happen to their child. How do we even consider being hopeful if our child is using substances in an unsafe way? And what would you say to them about holding on to hope, and how that can be a piece that gets them a little further down the road in this, knowing that hope is something that's kind of elusive for some and feels a little impossible for others?
Yeah, I mean, I look at hope as the anchor of the soul. You have to have it.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have hope, you're not going to have much. And I think, people do. There's a lot of kids that I've worked with that have grown out of it. It wasn't something that it turned into a full-on blown addiction. I just want to clarify that as well, as that even where kids do experiment with substances, they may never develop an addiction or have a problem with substances. And so you just have to be mindful of that too. That's where the important part of having an open and honest relationship is because you can monitor your child then. And so when you're doing that, then you can see signs. But I think, one of the things I look back at is that if you don't find love and acceptance in the places that you're supposed to, which is your home, your family, your parents, I will tell you this, you'll seek it elsewhere. But for the parents that have a loved one who, let's say, is struggling with addiction, I'm telling you, I feel your pain. I know how challenging that is. I know how tough it is to watch as well, because you're watching your own loved one struggle. But I also want you to be mindful as well, as that, there's days and moments inside of each individual that's struggling where they don't want to continue doing the things that they're doing. They're just trapped. And so I think it's always good to not be in the sense where we're forcing somebody to do something they're not ready for, but we're also to the point where there's like options and it's being talked about. And I think that's really important, to gravitate a person from, not thinking there's a problem, to starting to realize that maybe they do have a problem, and then to addressing the problem. But if we just kind of force what we want and our desires, I mean, I've told every parent this, I get it. Your desire for your child not to use drugs would stop them from using drugs, but it's not where they're at yet. So how do we get them to that place? And it's a process, and it's an often long one, but it's one that's met with and through that I found the most success with is one with a compassionate response, also one with a boundary response. And I think it's important for parents to establish boundaries with their loved ones that are struggling. And, whether that's like, I don't want the stuff in my house, whether that's, you have to uphold the standards of living in this house, and this is what we expect from you to live in this house. And so, but that's also a communication and a compromise as well. And I think one of the things that I've always asked kids or people struggling is, well, what can I do for you? Or what is it that you need? And maybe sometimes they don't know. But then you can continue the conversation where we can start to get somewhere. Yes, you're an adult, you can do what you want, you can make your decisions, and you're thinking that you can control your child to what decisions they can make, and you can to some extent, but not when they go out or make decisions for themselves. I don't care. You can be the best parents in the world, or you can be the worst parents in the world. Kids will eventually just follow the groups that they're hanging out with, regardless of all the great work that you've done. And so you have to be just really mindful of that. But I think that's the most important thing. I mean, hey, listen, I'm over 12 years sober. My kids have never seen me use drugs, never seen me drink alcohol, and they never will. My kids have never seen me struggle with addiction. I'm very open and honest to talk about it when we see people. I think, you have to be mindful too, as well as that, kids are going to pick up on what they see from you.
I remember the first time we spoke, you shared a story that helped me shift how I think and be able to go from fear to caring really easily. It was about kids on the block. Can you share it again so others can benefit from the humanity of that story?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, the downtown east side or anywhere where you see people struggling or using drugs in a community, you often think that, they're just doing it out of spite. They don't care about anything. Well, I'll tell you, in the downtown east side of Vancouver, especially, anytime there's a child that walks down the street with a family member, there's a shout on the block, which people yell, kids on the block. And what that means is watch your language, put your dope away. We don't want the kids to see. And it really goes to show just how beautiful the community of people are who are struggling, that they still have the capacity to see that they don't want this to happen to any other loved one. And, even with my kids coming in the downtown east side, ourselves, we go and sometimes handed out sandwiches or went for breakfast in the community, and you can hear people yelling, kids on the block. And it's very heartwarming
Sure is.
that people are aware, and nobody wants the pain that they're struggling with to be passed on to anybody else. And that was the biggest thing even in my life, was I didn't want any kid to see me like this. I mean, I was dealing with my own challenges and struggling with my own traumas and issues, but I sure didn't want any other, especially a young kid, to see it and to be fearful. So it really shows the dynamic of people that really do care about others.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Many families are overwhelmed and don't know where to begin. So in thinking of the families that are watching this and the caring adults and young kids' lives, what could they take away today to do tomorrow to be able to help them in this heart?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to understand I mean, it can be challenging to understand the landscape of what exists, to what supports exist to help your loved one. I think that's probably something that's could be done a lot better on many levels, the communication of what services are available to help and support loved ones that are struggling with addiction and substance use, because there is a significant amount of stuff out there. it's just really challenging to figure out. And I think you've got your own challenges when you're struggling with a loved one, that it's really hard to just kind of cipher through everything and look, it's just overwhelming. But I will promise you this, that anybody is watching this, you can always reach out to myself on my website. I don't charge anybody for anything for reaching out for help and support. I navigate them to the services that they need and what's best. And like I'll tell any parent, is if it's what your child wants, then let's move forward. But if it's just what you want, then it's going to be significantly challenging. So how do we get your child to the place where they want the same thing? And that just takes relationship building and connection. But I think one of the most powerful things that I've ever experienced in my life is just how powerful human connection and love and compassion is in somebody's life, because it can change the direction of it. And sometimes with family dynamics that come into play, especially with family members, is like we're kind of like, mom, dad, I don't need to hear you tell me what I need. Sometimes you have to let the outside services get in there and help your child, because that family dynamic can make it really challenging for somebody to. I mean, my wife says it to me all the time. I've been saying that to you for 3 months. And then I'll come home and somebody else said it to me, and I was like, "Well, you didn't say it like that exactly." And so you have to be really mindful. Somebody else may be able to be better at explaining it than you are. And like I said, like, I'm always available to help people navigate the services. I get people into treatment and recovery all the time. It doesn't take much for me to make a couple of phone calls to see what we can do to accomplish something. And hey, if it's always even if it's a conversation, I've met many families and their children at the Starbucks where myself and Victoria met. So happy to always, show up just to, have a quick conversation to see where we can get to.
Well, if that doesn't give families hope, I don't know what does. Any final thoughts? Anything that you want to share that we would benefit from hearing today that I haven't asked?
Yeah, I think you have to remember that behind every individual struggling, what's sad in our world is the question that we really have to ask ourselves is, why are so many people in our world gravitating to these substances knowing how deadly they are? And that can be a lot of social issues that aren't addressed. But I also look at the underlying issues of why somebody uses the drugs. The drugs aren't always the primary problem. There's a reason why people are using them. Now, that can be many factors. But one of the things that I've often discovered, even in my own journey, in my own path, is once I understood that it was trauma and undiagnosed learning disabilities of why I was medicating my life, it became, once I understood what those pieces of the puzzle were, because each and every child or person in this world is a puzzle. But if you don't understand, or you're missing pieces, you can't complete the puzzle. And so it's very important for us to understand that people who are gravitating to substances, there's probably some underlying issue there. And once we find out what the underlying issues are, it can be easier to treat the addiction, because it's a lot more than just the drugs. Get off the drugs, your life will get better. Well, I got off drugs for 31 years trying to get sober, but it was very hard to stay sober. And I'll tell you why. Maybe I get off drugs and I'd have a bed to sleep in, but what didn't get better was my mental capacity from the verbal abuse that I dealt with my whole life. And I describe that abuse, verbal abuse, as the most crippling abuse that somebody can go through. It actually curses an individual. And how I projected myself inward negatively is how I looked at the world as well. And so it becomes really hard for people to trust others. And so I just want you guys to understand that sometimes it's not just the drugs, and in most cases it's not. It's the reason why they're using them. And that's what we have to really work on figuring out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story, for being a voice in our province that is having these hard conversations, and just how important that is, and doing it on behalf of so many. So grateful for you, and grateful for our partners and vendors who make this work possible. And most importantly, to all of you that have joined us, thank you for making time in your busy lives to be with us today. Your being here is a powerful example of what caring looks like. Thanks for learning with us.